Well, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to your homes for this 5th edition of Season 4 of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And I would like to start by thanking everyone that took the time and trouble to come out to Opal Divines for the metaphysical philosophical meeting that we here at Esoteric Science Roundtable and the fine folks over at Therefore I Am, Jeff Contreras and crew, co-host each third Wednesday of the month. And again, do want to thank everybody that came out. We had a pretty small gathering, all things told. But I do want to thank Gary Johnson from Smash the State for making an appearance. That's one of the libertarian television shows, and his broadcast is every Saturday at 9 p.m. on Channel 10. And again, we had a kind of small meeting in relation to what we normally have, but it allowed me to have a conversation with Gary, which was good. I got to exchange some ideas with him, which was very cool. And my partner in crime, Jeff, was conspicuously absent for some reason, so hopefully everything's okay with him. Let's see, today I would like to discuss the topic crisis, tension, and emergence. And this is another way of describing the Hegelian dialectic, so-called, which is familiar to some folks, which is normally considered in terms of problem, reaction, solution. And I'll get into more of the mechanics of that idea in a second. But the idea, and this is very much part and parcel of our human condition, is the idea of crisis, tension, and emergence. In the sense that our entire human history is one of crisis, tension, and emergence. And what essentially takes place in human consciousness that allows for evolution, allows for further growth, allows for just the evolutionary process in general to carry out. And this works out in the way that a crisis appears at some level, and from that crisis, a point of tension is set up. And you can think about using a rubber band and pulling the rubber band taut and seeing the tension that exists with the rubber band. And that could be a symbol of, or conveying the tension that takes place. And then there's an emergence from that tension of either some resolution, some reconciliation, or some new condition, and then some static condition or some stasis is evidenced and developed until a next crisis comes along and further tumultuous situation kicks in that further exacerbates some aspect of manifestation. And so again, some crisis will emerge in the minds of men, and it may take on some physical aspects ultimately, and then this crisis will be evident among men, and then some tension will emerge because our reaction to the crisis creates a tension and creates a line of thinking from the minds that are attracted or paying attention to the particular crisis. And so that line of intent, that line of trying to understand the crisis results in a tension. And so this tension, again, allows for different ideas and different aspects of the crisis to be considered and to manifest themselves until, again, some area of emergence arises. And so, again, our history is replete with examples of crisis, tension, and emergence. And also crisis, tension, and emergence can also be looked at, again, in terms of the evolution of humanity and the evolution of consciousness through form. This isn't merely a human condition. It also carries over to other kingdoms in nature, but we as self-conscious beings or entities have the quality of mind activated, and so crisis, tension, and emergence takes on a whole new characteristic, or takes on a whole new meaning for us as humanity. And so again, the history of humanity is one that is a series of unfoldings of crisis, tension, emergence, on to the next crisis, tension, and emergence. And this continually takes place. We can look to our own individual lives and see points of crisis that result in some sort of a tension, and then some resulting emergence of either some reconciliation, some stilling of the water, so to speak, some calmness that's restored, or some new condition that's added in after the tension has been somewhat relieved or broken. And so again, this takes place continually throughout history in our humanity. And again, our history could be looked at as the quality of mind emerging through humanity, or it could also be considered as in terms of spirit and matter relating to one another, because we in our human physical vehicles are part matter and part spirit, and there is an intermingling that meets together like a spark that creates consciousness and creates our ability to interact and exchange with one another, again in a self-conscious, in a thinking manner. And so again, when spirit and matter meet and merge, this is a volatile combination. This is seldom, if ever, just a seamless, steady merging, a smooth, easy transition point. This is, in almost every instance, going to, again, create some kind of volatility, some kind of pressure, some kind of crisis. And we see this recurring throughout time, that this volatility is part and parcel of our human nature, and that we embrace it in some respects, whether that's unconsciously or consciously, that we are seeking further points of crisis and tension. And this also ties in just to the human quality and our human nature, in the respect that we can get complacent and calm at a certain point in time and be pacified with situations, but invariably the human spirit at some level is going to kick in and is going to demand that there be some change so that the process of evolution can continue forward. If things are so static that no evolution can carry forward, there is really no purpose for our humanity, and there's no purpose for any of the kingdoms in nature to be working through this creation process. There has to be some goal, and as we are components of a creative intelligence, as we ourselves are a creative intelligence, created by a creative intelligence, that this is part of the system. And so we, as humanity, continue to work towards these different points of crisis, tension, and emergence. Again, in our own individual lives, in our groups and families, in our work environment, in all areas of our human endeavor, we individually work through crisis, tension, and emergence. In the human, it has a cyclic correspondence to the number 7 in our development. And so at age 7, we see the permanent teeth pretty much set in. 14, we see the puberty starting to kick in. Age 21, area of the young adult. Age 28 is another 7-year cyclic point of crisis and tension, where careers and we're being reoriented towards our life's vocation and maybe a life partner, whether or not we're going to try to have children, things of that nature start to emerge at those times. And sometimes earlier, sometimes later, depending. But more or less, you can look at 7-year cycles in the lives of individuals, in the lives of humans, and see how crisis, tension, and emergence works around these different cyclic stages, and also numerically and quantitatively that these things unfold in this respect. So again, mind unfolding through our human vehicle is an expression of this crisis, tension, and emergence. And also, humanity is part of, or is the very essence of humanity is tied to 2 great streams of energy. And there are really 7 total, if you want to look in terms of, or consider these ideas in terms of what are known as esoterically the 7 rays, which are 7 distinct embodiments of divine qualities. And the 2 in particular that really relay and relate to our human nature and our human condition are the 3rd ray, which is called active intelligence. And this is also, within those 2 words, active intelligence, gives another component or another description of our story, our human story, crisis, tension, emergence. We're working through this active, intelligent component to further our consciousness and further the creative impulse through our human kingdom, and also to help it to propel through other kingdoms as well. We have a distinct relation with the other kingdoms in nature, and we have a definite effect on Either they're uplifting or they're being held back. And so again, the third ray of active intelligence, again, it could be considered a description of the quality of mind moving through matter and refining itself gradually as it moves through form after form, and a crisis, a tension, and an emergence demonstrate itself. And then again, another crisis, tension, and emergence as more adequate forms are constructed to meet the needs of expanding consciousness. Consciousness, our human consciousness and all consciousness is it is the very essence of that consciousness is that it seeks to fulfill, expand, and identify with the other constituent parts of creation. And so there's a natural magnetic rapport built into us and all things in humanity that want to identify, understand, and know each other. Certain members of humanity are going to express that more so than others, but nonetheless, underlying our human condition, there is that urge to relate to each other, to our environment, and to understand our place in our environment, and just our human nature, what makes us tick, and what can we do to best proceed through the life process. And so again, crisis, tension, emergence. And this is how we learn. This is how we grow and achieve. As a crisis crops up in our lives, we are forced to deal with it. So we're forced to send some line of thinking to the crisis, creating the tension, so that we can have some point of emergence, hopefully some reconcilable position where the trouble can subside and be dealt with at that level. And so again, certain people are going to have more success dealing with the various crises that come up in their lives than others. And this is, again, it's a learning process. It's a symptom of living, that we learn to get past these difficulties and we move on to greater avenues and arenas of inclusiveness and expansions of consciousness. As we move past the troubles, we can look past us and we can see how we've grown from these obstacles and these things that we may have perceived of as, immense walls at one point in time. We now look back as just a challenge in the past, or something that helped us. We had to activate ourselves to achieve and to overcome these crises. And so again, this is part of the human condition. We are quite resilient. We as humanity are probably the most resilient species in the entire galaxy, in the entire universe, by virtue of the human condition, in that we forget our soul nature, we forget our spiritual nature, we come into a dense physical plane, and we have to relearn our origins. And this forgetting and this role-playing that we assume is quite different than other places, other localities, and other the schools that are existing on other planets, whether you choose to believe that there are such or not, nonetheless, just for a hypothesis' sake. Another ray, so-called, or another divine quality that has a definite impact on our humanity is the so-called fourth ray, which is harmony through conflict. And this is also another way of describing the crisis, tension, and emergence, in that harmony is of the soul. Union, solidarity, all these things are more of the nature of the soul. The soul is not divisive. Again, it does not pick favorites. It doesn't choose to say, I like this over this. The soul is, again, it's a uniform condition. And so the soul nature is harmony. It's the very essence of harmony. And so that is it's the natural symptom, or it's the natural component of our nature. And it is what we are at our very essence. Is calm, is peace, is understanding, is all these things. All this passivity and this calmness is part of our soul nature. We just are not very aware of it in the physical vehicle, because again, this whole entire world is a series of crisis, tension, and emergence. And so as things are chaotically reshaping, reforming, restructuring, and just whirling about us like a tornado wind or something like that, it's difficult for us to navigate and just go through without being somewhat caught up in the different crises, the different tensions that are constantly playing at us. And so we're being kind of pulled at from many directions at all times. Again, whether that be individually, the family life, the workplace, again, all areas of human endeavor, and certainly things that take place nationally and internationally are going to affect the individuals in that nation, and how that nation is interacting or relating to other nations is certainly going to cause crisis, tension, and emergence, depending on how these things play themselves out. But the larger tensions are going to ultimately filter down into an individual understanding at some level. Water cooler talk in this day and age, certainly sports still has its place in the sun, but more often than not these days, the water cooler talk in the various offices might be more of a political nature. It might be, world events, world politics, things that have more significance for more people. And this is, again, part of the emerging of mind that's playing forward through our humanity. And this, again, is human history, the mind emerging through form. As our intelligent nature and our ability to think and reason is honed, then we see, again, the story of crisis, tension, and emergence played out on a vast scale. So again, humanity has been unfolding its consciousness for quite some time. According to esoteric tradition, about 18 million years ago is when man first became self-conscious. Now certainly 18 million years ago is a very long time. We don't have historical records to go back that far. So in most respects, this would be considered very speculative to even consider that far back. But nonetheless, religious records and those individuals that have been able to discern into unseen realms, if you will, into what might be termed the Akashic record, or a place in which past, present, and potential future can be tapped into and retrieved pretty accurately. It can be employed, excuse me, and so this is a way in which we can look at ancient religious records, we can look at those that have been able to tap in and ascertain some of these greater truths, and judge in with throw that in with our own intuitive understanding, our own understanding and our own feelings about things, and then we can come to some greater reasoning or understanding of the situation as it's playing out. And so again, if we choose to consider in those terms that 18 million years ago, our human form is so far vastly different than anything remotely close to what we are residing in currently, but nonetheless, the very the very initial rudimentary human beings were at that point coming into being, in a sense, and our material natures were starting to become more dense, concrete, and manifest. And so at that point, 18 million years ago, the first real crisis to engulf humanity collectively took place. And that is when our animal man nature took on the quality or characteristic of self-consciousness. And so the quality or the spark of mind, the fire of mind and self-consciousness became ours and became melded with our human component collectively en masse. And that was the first great crisis in which the mind nature merged with our human, again, more or less animal man at that time. And so this is like two fronts meeting, a cold front and a warm front meeting, and there's going to be some precipitation, there's going to be some volatility and some disruption. And so from that crisis, mind slowly began to emerge. And then from that point, 18 million years ago, we can look forward through, again, various religious records, various means at our disposal to ascertain that back that far in these vast distances in the past, and see the quality of mind moving forward. And so mind gradually moves forward and implants itself in the forms that are ready for self-conscious expression. And this is why animals, plants, and minerals are at the level that they are. They are yet to become self-conscious. They're yet to have that great crisis, tension, and emergence that will allow for the birth of an entire kingdom. Because this could be considered the birth of the human kingdom, in that we were more lumped in with the animals previous to the point when with the inception of the mind quality taking root in us collectively, and this was a major differentiation. This is also a point of crisis, tension, and emergence as the kingdoms in nature further separated and delineated from each other. And so new distinctions were being manifest that characterized one kingdom in distinction to another. And so again, we have definite relations to the lower kingdoms and higher kingdoms above our human condition as well. As to how we relate to these conditions, it really boils down to the quality of mind. Mind is the one key component that allows us to relate to, again, the lower kingdoms and to relate ourselves to higher unfolding that is taking place alongside, parallel to our human unfolding, but nonetheless has a definite, intimate relation to our human unfolding. And so this culmination takes place from time to time throughout history. And so in the Lemurian days, so-called, this is the age of the race around 18 million years ago, was the so-called Lemurian continent, and this is when self-consciousness first became evident. And then further things played themselves out in our human nature, and we eventually reached a point when a whole new continent emerged that was the representation of the race, and that was the Atlantean days, Atlantis. Again, this is somewhat speculative, considering that there isn't a lot of written information regarding Atlantis, and there's not a lot of easy ways to trace back this information, but nonetheless, we consider it, at least just hypothetically, that another great crisis took place in the Atlantean days. And not to mention also that great ages in which land rises and subsides tie into this as well. These are greater aspects of a crisis, tension, and emergence as well, in which the whole initiating location for a race subsides, and then a new emerging quality of the mind nature and the evolutionary process works through humanity, and a new locality is focused upon. And this energy is part and parcel of the creative process playing itself out as well. That the proper forms have to find their way into manifestation to meet the need of consciousness, of life expanding, of our mind nature expanding. And so after the Lemurian age passed, and our mental quality was in the process of becoming more potent, more activated, we still were not centered in the mind in the way that we think and act in this day and age. We were more concentrating on just the workings of the emotional body, trying to function in a physical vehicle, trying to understand how to move and react to our environment just on a physical level. Then again, the next great point of crisis, tension, and emergence was during the so-called Atlantean days, in which there was a great war of all against all. And this is where the division of good versus evil really took on a more black and white kind of connotation, and things were really kind of cut and dried in a point where there was a definite duality, a definite polarity demonstrating itself between what would be termed the Dark Brotherhood and the hierarchy, or the forces of light. And so there's this playing out has always worked its way through humanity at some level. It finally reached a culmination where our emotional nature really caused this, it really exacerbated these conditions at this point. And so again, keeping in mind that during the Lemurian times, we were working on the physical nature more so, and then during the Atlantean age, we became more centered in our emotional nature, in our desires and our whims and our wishes. And this also was a further crisis, tension, emergence situation. And we had to further deal with an unfolding of our human nature. And this was collectively. Humanity collectively was moving past just understanding how to move through the dense physical vehicle, but trying to pass that, understand our emotional nature, understanding, once again, our relation to one another, feelings of love, hate, and all in between, as we, again, try to relate to each other, try to relate to other humanity, try to relate to our environment, and try to gain some greater understanding of the situation, and how can we intelligently move through and make our way through our life situation. So the emotional nature became very potent, and at that point, the Great Flood myths that are recurring through all the great religious traditions and throughout history in some form or another, we find the flood tradition repeated over and over again. Again, this is another great benchmark, archetypal change in our humanity. Also, the very nature of our emotions and our desires is symbolically represented by water. And so the Atlantean kingdom finding its demise through a flood definitely ties in to the emotional nature and that upheaval that took place. And so our emotional nature became very dominant. And it still holds sway to a large degree. Then, following the Atlantean age, the Aryan so-called, and the first Aryan community was the ancient Asian Indian society that sprang up, and that was at least good over 10,000 years ago, give or take a few thousand years. And so this again showed another expansion, another point of crisis, tension, and emergence that manifests itself through the race. And so during the beginnings of the Indian age and the very beginnings of the so-called Aryan, which we still are in the so-called Aryan cycle, that's still finding its way to its culmination as well. But nonetheless, the quality of mind became more prevalent and began to emerge. And this is the definite component of what we're working on right now, is the mind nature. We're seeking to perfect the mind nature, and then from the mind, then we'll move in the sixth unfolding of human consciousness. Then we'll move towards a synthesis in which mind, emotion, and the energy nature of the physical body are synthesized and integrated into what is known as the integrated personality. And then our soul nature can be more emphasized, and it will have a more active component in our humanity as we express ourselves, as again, the quality of mind unfolds, and we learn more about our physical vehicles. We learn more about ourselves. As the Greeks say, "Man, know thyself." And so this is again another area of challenge and opportunity that humanity has before it to try to find some form of synthesis, to reach a collective plateau as humanity so that we can gather ourselves for the next crisis, tension, and emergence. Now again, going back to the Hegelian dialectic so-called, it can be more properly considered as thesis, antithesis, synthesis, or as it's more properly known, problem, reaction, solution. This is just a 19th century revision of a very spiritual concept. And it's the 19th century Germans, the philosophers at that time, were rediscovering a lot of old metaphysical truths, either through various aspects of psychology and philosophy and things of that nature, that, again, these old esoteric truths were being rediscovered, although they were being looked at in a very sterile material perspective, almost an atheistic kind of outlook. And so they were repackaged and reconsidered, and a new point of focus was added on these ancient concepts that are, again, ingrained in our humanity. We are, again, harmony through conflict. We are active intelligence. So we are a constant flux. We are a constant turmoil within ourselves, within our very physical vehicle, on into society and on to the world scale. This again, is just a key component of humanity that we will never actually outgrow per se necessarily, but we will continue to work through, again, until some point of culmination, some plateau is reached collectively by humanity. And so again, this concept has been reintroduced in a sense for our modern era in terms of problem, reaction, solution. And so we can see how this can be carried over more so to events that are taking place and unfolding on a world scale. Now, granted, 18 million years ago, we couldn't point to certain key figures and groups that we could see behind the scenes plotting, amalgamating power, and gathering their intent to force certain things to manifest and crop up through our human process, through our human endeavor. This didn't exist at that time, and so this was merely a spiritual energy, a spiritual impulse that was moving through our humanity that was right and proper for the times. It was a proper evolutionary component for us at the time. Now again, as the mind nature has become more so the predominant focus in many respects for our humanity, again, a reinterpretation of these ancient archetypal ideas remanifests and is repackaged, again, problem, reaction, solution. Although, in this instance, in our day and age, more often than not, the crisis is a manufactured crisis, manufactured by groups with a certain intent in mind to foment some release of some crisis, and then the resultant tension from that crisis that they pull in the directions that they're hoping to steer it and draw it, in hopes of finding some emergence along the lines of some party line, some group idea, some group focus, and whether that be a very small group or a larger group, these things are going to depend. Nonetheless, this is still, demonstrates our history, and it demonstrates the quality of mind unfolding gradually through our human condition, and that this again, crisis, tension, emergence finds itself in many levels of society. Also, some more recent examples I want to point to, considering crisis, tension, and emergence, might be in relation to what's going on in the CIA currently. If we consider the CIA, recently Porter Goss took over, another Skull and Bones guy, and so that being the case, it's helpful to consider things in terms of motive, understanding people's backgrounds, and so if that's where they're coming from, where might they be headed? And that's the way we have to kind of think about these things, or it would be helpful to consider these things in these terms. So that being the case, you get another Bonesman into the administration, he becomes head of CIA, and then automatically people start tendering their resignations, things start getting shaken up, restructured, reworked, and a whole refocus is taking place within the CIA that is only, just now really seeing its way into manifestation. Now, certainly there have been shakeups in the past, but to have such a shakeup to the degree and the extent that we're having right now is somewhat unprecedented, and it also is a symptom. It's an indicator of the symptom of humanity. It's an indicator of our unfolding consciousness, and that even in all of these areas of human endeavor and unfolding, we can see how these shakeups are going on. And we can look at the most mundane things from sporting, sport activities. We can see crisis, tension, and emergence unfolding through, anything we choose, really. If any human endeavor is going to have examples of crisis, tension, and emergence, because again, this is a human condition, and this is part and parcel of our unfolding. And so again, this idea that things are shaking up is nothing new. It's an age-old symptom of humanity, but the means by which things are shaking up and the degree to which things are shaking up, the rapidity with which things are shaking up, these are the things that are quite different than they have been before. And so things are, from point of crisis, tension, emergence to point of crisis, tension, emergence is much quicker these days. And so we're seeing rapid crisis, tension, emergence, crisis, tension, emergence, crisis, tension, emergence at so many levels. It gets to be, quite frankly, somewhat overwhelming if we really try to just stand back and take it all in at one time. It can be a bit much. But to intelligently step back and look and focus at the various components of humanity and look in terms of governmental, religious, social programs, arts, science, religion, education, financial endeavors. If we step back and we look in a more dissecting, discerning manner, we can start to intelligently get a grasp of this crisis, tension, and emergence that's unfolding. Again, in such a rapid fashion that it's playing out. It's even preparing for the show. A quick example: as soon as I set down a quick set of notes, I'll be watching the television, or I'll get a phone call from somebody with something entirely new, that a new crisis, tension, emergence has come into my awareness, and I might feel compelled to amend, what I have written, or have to feel compelled to include it in some level. And that just goes to show how quickly we find ourselves cycling through these changes. Our human nature the very nature itself is change. That is it's a component of our human unfolding. It's been with us from the get-go and will continue. Change, again, is part of our nature. But to be able to understand change and understand it from an esoteric or an occult manner and look at the hidden aspects, look at the energy moving behind these outer seemings and outer circumstances, that is a real key that would allow for some understanding to take place and some wisdom to be applied to our intelligent assessment of what's going on. And so again, keeping in mind that a lot of this shakeup is part and parcel of the quality of mind that has emerged within humanity. Certainly that's one reflection of it. Our mind nature has never been so potent as it is now in our current day and age. It's more potent than it ever has been in any time in history. And not everyone would probably be so quick to agree with that, because there's certainly, dumbing down kind of implementation that's going on in the education system and things of that nature. So we can see where there are processes that might run counter to the progress of the evolutionary unfolding. And this, again, is part of a residual or leftover component of the Atlantean unfolding, in which there was a definite division, a definite duality or polarity, a shift that took place in which lines were cut between what you might term good and evil. And so again, the emotional nature unfolding finds its way through to our current day. And it still does have a great impact and sway, and that, make no mistake about that, the emotional nature still does predominate in many respects. But again, as mind becomes more potent, and it tends to, again, like two fronts meeting, a warm and a cold front, there's going to be some kind of a clash, some kind of precipitation. And so when mind meets emotion, there's a disruption. And mind, ultimately, being the higher, the more refined component of the two, will ultimately win out, if you will, or ultimately impose itself on the lesser. And this is also a part of our lesson to be learned as well, is how to impose our understanding, impose our will on our own individual crisis, tension, and emergence. Many people, again, everyone's caught up in crisis, tension, and emergence. More people are more cognizant of their individual crises than others. And so if we're able to identify the crisis, then we can look in an esoteric fashion and look behind the scenes and try to determine what the cause is, what actually created this situation for us. And so, and this psychology is one key aspect that's going to refine itself more so in the future. And the focus of psychology will be trying to ascertain the inner nature of the man and trying to ascertain the emotional component in relation to the intelligence or the mind nature in individuals. And so that ratio will be considered more so, maybe a mind to emotional ratio quotient will be considered. And so again, as mind is more the focus in the future, as it will continually be, we'll see some resolve taking place until a new point of crisis, tension, and emergence takes place. In the next vast, grand unfolding, we'll see an entirely new kingdom in nature manifesting itself in a very real manner on the planet. Now, certainly, if we think in terms of the already existing kingdoms in nature, we have mineral, plant, animal, and man making the fourth kingdom in nature. The fifth kingdom in nature is the so-called kingdom of souls, or the kingdom of heaven. And this is a condition more so than a locality, and this is basically a state of mind or a state of perfection that has been achieved by certain individuals. Certain men have made their way through vast amounts of crisis, tension, and emergence, and they've passed through great stages of crisis, tension, and emergence that might be referred to as initiation. And so an initiation science has been in effect on the planet since roughly about 18 million years ago, when we first became self-conscious, that there became a need for the spiritual guides of the race to implement some method of instruction. And so the first schools to teach man how to deal with his latent but unfolding mental nature began to develop. And so these schools began to move forward throughout history, and up until around the Atlantean crisis, the Great Flood era, the hierarchy, so-called, has been working pretty much hand in hand with humanity. And the masters, so-called, did walk openly among the sons of man and did interact openly with the sons of men in a very real and meaningful fashion. After the so-called war of all against all, or the Great Flood period in our history, that was the great division in which there was a subsiding, there was a receding of the brothers of light, so-called, of the hierarchy, into the shadows, into the kind of, back into the woodwork and out of the scenes, out of the mainstream human understanding. The dark brotherhood, so-called, became more pervasive, and manipulation of matter through magical means became more and more the way of the day. And so that manipulating of matter by our intent, by those with not the best intent for all of humanity in mind, became the predominant energy being directed by those groups that understood the science at the time and were able to use it and direct it for their own ends. And so this waging of war took place, and it still continues. There's still this interaction going on between good and evil, so-called, dark and light. And there's a constant playing from one against the other for jockeying for position. Our very nature and the very nature of all manifestation is based on love, which is a uniting, tying principle. When we think of things in terms of division, competition, all things that are, causing us to fight each other and to disagree and argue, that is still part of our human nature, certainly, but it is the part that we're seeking to work through so that we can recover the love nature that is underlying all of manifestation, all of creation. And so this is what is being sought and emphasized by the so-called hierarchy, Christ and the Church Invisible, that group of great individuals, perfected men and women, seek to use the energy of love to reestablish and reorient humanity towards the right and true spiritual values that, again, our manifestation is based upon. Again, we have free will, and so we can make the choice. Do we want to stay competitive, stay divisive, or do we want to work towards some kind of cooperation and some kind of constructive, again, working together, whether that be between individuals, groups, families, nations, or collectively as a race, that we can work towards some consolidation and some cooperation. And so again, this playing out behind the scenes is evidenced, and the forces of light, so-called, are gradually manifesting themselves in a very real manner once again. And we will see in the not so distant future, and as far as putting a time limit on it, I don't know, 20 years perhaps, maybe 50 years, somewhere in that time range. I wouldn't put it much past that, 20 to 50 years from now, that we will see openly and actively working with men, these teachers behind the scenes, that they will once again reemerge from their hidden places. And the reason of the recession, the reason of the drawback, was not because they were turning their backs on humanity or anything along those lines. They were allowing our free will to set the course. They were also allowing the emotional and the mind nature to develop along the lines of our humanity, as we collectively as humanity would move forward. So again, there was not any kind of direct intervention with that unfolding, although there's always been guidance, there's always been hints, innuendo, and a little nudge in the right direction, so to speak, from this group that has stood back behind humanity and continues to stand back and guide and watch over the race. They will continually emerge more so into our human understanding, and there will be a point in time when this so-called fifth kingdom in nature will actively merge with the already existing kingdoms, and there will be a true spirit of cooperation existing. And we can actually have these masters, so-called, or the members, representatives of the hierarchy, actually consulting and adding their expertise in the various areas of human endeavor. The so-called seven rays, the aspects and attributes of divinity that manifest along this sevenfold manner, the masters, so-called, find themselves working along these rays. And so you'll have first ray masters, will of power, second ray masters, love, wisdom, third ray masters, active intelligence, fourth ray master, harmony through conflict, fifth ray master, science, concrete science, sixth ray, devotion or idealism, seventh ray masters, synthesis, ceremonial magic, the financial aspects of our human endeavor. And so you'll see Christ and the Church Invisible gradually merging. And so as the hierarchy can establish some cooperation and some inroads and some sense of unity within humanity, then a further addition will culminate, and that will be Christ merging with men. And so the roads have to be made straight, and circumstances have to set themselves up in the right and proper fashion, so that this fuller alignment and this fuller merging between kingdoms and nature can take place. And so ultimately there will be an intelligent cooperation between the race of men within the fourth kingdom and those perfected men and women within the fifth kingdom of nature, again emerging for work. What kind of work? To bring forward the quality of love through matter, trying to spiritualize matter. This is the goal of all the evolutionary process from the inception of the so-called Big Bang, or whatever you want to call it, has been for spirit to indwell into the various differentiated aspects of matter, to move through that matter, to refine that matter by spiritualizing it, and then moving through into newer forms, more appropriate and adequate forms that will be able to house and allow the spirit to move and to activate. Kind of like radioactivity is a good way to look at it. The radioactive nature of certain minerals and elements is kind of like the radiatory capacity that we can have in the future by virtue of these relationships, and that this unfolding of consciousness will activate. And once matter has been spiritualized and has been conditioned, then it will meet a more ordered fashion. It'll have more purpose in the greater context of our creation. So this is a matter of. And also, you can also kind of think of it in a sense of perhaps a defragmentation on a computer, that you see a block and you'll see that there are little bits within the greater block that seem out of place. And so there'll be a rearrangement, a resorting going on that will take out the strings that are no longer fit or that don't make for the cohesive workings of the machine. They'll be removed, and the whole continuity will be restored, and it will theoretically work better, faster, more efficiently, more cohesively. And this is another example that we can consider, that again, life emerging through matter and unfolding itself, and consciousness unfolding itself gradually through time. And so again, we have adequate examples to look around, and this is something I would ask people to consider if they want to start observing things from a respect of crisis, tension, emergence. Problem, reaction, solution works just as well, although I would more relegate the problem, reaction, solution to the political shakings out and things of that nature. In terms of crisis, tension, emergence, that would be more of a metaphysical way of delving into things and looking at the energy that's motivating groups of men and what's motivating those that wish to enslave us, those that wish to guide and serve the race. Looking at the underlying energies at that level, this will give us much more insight into what's playing out at many levels, and we can have a fuller, greater understanding of the panning out, of what's playing out through humanity and the other kingdoms as well. Another aspect of our unfolding, the crisis, tension, and emergence, again, this number 7 has much implication esoterically for our unfolding and for our humanity. And we're currently about to work through the 5th subdivision of the so-called Aryan race, which is the 5th race. And so number 5 signifies mind for one thing, and so we can see that mind is really active at this point in time. But we are going to be moving into the so-called 6th subrace of the Aryan race. And this is going to allow for another crisis, tension, and emergence situation and another unfolding to take place. Currently, things in form on this planet are mineral-based, they're carbon-based at the very core. And this mineral quality is seeking perfection as well through our humanity, through all forms in nature, as life moves through forms, it's moving through carbon-based forms. The carbon-based forms on this planet will also reach a culmination after a 7th cycle has finished itself. And once that is consummated, we will no longer delve or dwell in mineral-based bodies. From that next point on, we move to the next kingdom, which is the plant kingdom, so-called, and we'll start over through a 7-fold cyclic dissemination of evolution and intelligence working out through form once again. And so the mineral body will culminate after a cycle of 7, and then we will, upon the first subsection of the next unfolding, the next major unfolding, we will find ourselves in more of a plant-based body, and that's as to the definite, characteristics and qualities and a description of how that will play out. That's certainly yet to demonstrate itself. We've got a ways to go yet before the plant nature is manifest. And so again, we still have to work through this mineral nature. But this again shows how intelligence and consciousness moves through various forms. Again, considering the mineral as the basest or lowest, plant, animal, man, and then the superhuman kingdoms. And so again, we'll move through 7 cycles of the mineral in our human nature. Then we'll move through 7 cycles of the plant condition in our human nature. Now, not all of these conditions are going to take place on the Earth planet. This is another aspect of esoteric science that will have to be probably taken as a hypothesis by most, in that once we culminate through, again, the mineral and the plant nature, we will find ourselves before too terribly long on an entirely another globe, and life will spring up on that globe, and we will take with us everything that we've brought with us. Everything that we've learned and we've cultivated and it's culminated in our humanity will find itself emerging once again and starting over, just as things took place on Earth from a previous globe, which in that instance would be the moon. The moon is not a little satellite that was spun off the Earth. According to esoteric tradition, the moon is our former home, and it's basically like the corpse of a dead person just rotting out in space. Obviously on a planetary level, but the moon is our mother, according to esoteric tradition, and that's why it has so much influence on us astrologically, energetically. There's a lot that ties in that respect, and so that nature will continue to fulfill itself. And so from the moon through the Earth cycle, that will culminate. That crisis, tension, and emergence will play through. And then from that point, the life expression will find its way to an entirely different globe, and we'll continue to work our way through the 7 aspects of the mineral nature, 7 aspects of the plant nature, 7 aspects of an animal nature, and then 7 aspects of a human condition for human consciousness to unfold through. And so the key consideration is to think in terms of 7, as far as unfolding of cycles of 7. And that's the core that lies behind our human evolution unfolding, and all unfolding for that matter. Planetary evolution takes place in a 7-fold manner. Systemic evolution takes place in a 7-fold manner. And then below, down to lesser kingdoms and to lesser evolved states of consciousness that also are caught up and compelled by these cycles. And so that's it's part and parcel of that emerging as well. And so, again, to kind of recap a bit, our human history is replete with crisis, tension, and emergence unfolding. And so in our individual lives, in our community lives, state, nation, in the world, we're going to constantly see these things playing themselves out. Once we seek to gain an understanding of the energies underlying these situations, then we can proceed with much more wisdom, and we can really get a grasp on where we're going to be headed next. We can, with an intelligent understanding, surmise the next best move to make. And that is one thing that esoteric science allows, is for an understanding of this energetic outflowing and how we can ride the crest of the wave, and we can steer where we want to head. And we can do this as a race collectively, we can do this individually, we can do this in various group formations. It's really up to us as to how we want to steer the boat collectively. But nonetheless, there are, again, people that are going to let crises just completely take them over, and they'll completely shut them down, wipe out their sense of understanding and reason, and just wreak havoc on individuals. It's the people that can, go through this, can wade through the storm intelligently, are going to be the ones that are going to be the best, be best in positions to be showing of examples, to give us answers that we need to move forward collectively. So those with the discriminating and discerning sense can wade through, and they can understand the nature of the storm, and so they can move through with intelligence and have this guidance behind them, and have the faith and reassurance and confidence and the knowing that they're going to be able to make it to where they need to go in their right and proper and good time, because they have a better understanding of this unfolding. And so we can proceed in however we like. We can proceed with complete ignorance as to situations, or we can try to intelligently apprehend and grasp the situation and make some real progress along those lines. It's going to be up to us, definitely. Looks like we're wrapping up here, so I want to go ahead and remind folks to check out Therefore I Am every Tuesday at 10 p.m. on Channel 16. I want to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I want to thank all the folks in the viewing audience that took the time to tune in and watch the show. Thanks, Austin. You guys take care. Have a nice evening, and we'll be back next Thursday, Channel 11, 8 p.m. Thanks, Austin. Take care.